Welcome back to the show. This is a show where we're talking about how generally AI and technology is impacting our society, whether it's the way we work, the way we educate ourselves and our children, the way we interact with each other. And today we're going to be focusing on how the education sector is shifting. We're not just going to focus on how AI is going to be impacting it, but that's going to be a major part of it. My name is Rod, and I'm a Master in Public Policy student at the Harvard Kennedy School. My focus is primarily on the way AI impacts the economy. And today what I thought we'd do is take a step back and think, before even people start working in this economy, how are they being prepared for it through our education system? And my guests today have spent the last several months working on this, more broadly, not just around technology, but thinking about some innovations in the education space with microschools and some things generally around that. Maybe not every single one is considered a microschool. And so I'm very excited for you guys to be here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and I wanted to start maybe with just like a brief intro from everyone and just like telling us a little bit about what the project is. Do you want to start first?
Sure, yeah. My name is Jaysan. We're all masters in the education school here, and my specific focus is in the cognitive sciences and uses of technology. And I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
My name is William. I am also a master's student at the Grad School of Education. Before Harvard, I was a teacher in New York City for 4 years. I taught middle school history and math. And kind of leading to this conversation, I was really disheartened with the direction my school organization was headed when AI started bubbling up. So came to Harvard to try to better understand what's out there and what's going on. And I'm excited for this conversation.
Excellent, perfect, yeah.
And I'm Ruben. I spent 11 years working in middle schools. I was a science and social studies teacher for 8 years, and the last 3 years as an assistant principal out in Richmond, California. I came to Hugsy in the education policy and analysis program. Similarly, because of some frustrations, with the day-to-day, I didn't have the chance to ever step back and kind of survey the environment that was around me and what was pushing schools forward, because we were just grinding away each and every day. So it's been great to be here and been great to do this research with these guys.
And you guys started a project together. You three plus another member started a project together called Tomorrowschools. And this was as part of this is where you went and visited 7 schools so far, and you have a report coming out about it soon. Can you, one of you, whoever wants, give an overview of what that project is about? What is this report about coming out?
Yeah, I can do it. So in the fall, we took a course with the title is a question that says, why do innovations in education fail and how can they succeed? And so none of us were talking about the project in August when we signed up for the course, but we all came to the class with that question in mind and trying to get an understanding of what the answers might be. And you probably heard it, we come from very different backgrounds. There's the fourth team member is international. He's a math teacher from Australia. And so we have these super, I think, intriguing backgrounds where the question at the center, we can try to use our backgrounds to answer it and think about it with our different lenses. And so what we came to the conclusion was, of that question by the end of the semester, was that microschools, we can define microschools in a bit, but alternative to public, alternative to private, alternative to charter, microschools have a really viable opportunity to impact and innovate traditional K-12 education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big conclusions that we got from that class is that the current landscape of education is just incredibly rigid. And as many public institutions are, it's very hard to change. And although we have a lot of this new technology and also just a lot of new learning science, it's hard for these systems to really integrate them. Mm-hmm. One of the things we talk a lot about in that class is that at best you can kind of have add-ons to an existing system, but if at the core of it there's inherent flaws, there's nothing to really be done that can undo those.
Right.
And these microschools are this incredible landscape for these emerging school models where the people creating them can really start with the question of like, what if we were to design school from scratch?
Yeah.
And especially post-COVID, with certain changes in policies and also this new kind of like frustration and dissatisfaction amongst parents who saw education up close, these microschools have really started to boom, and we felt like we really needed to see them.
And this is interesting because I'd love to get your take in it, given that you spent a lot of time in the school system. Where does this rigidity come from, and what are some of the problems that these schools are trying to tackle? And what is not working with the current system, the education system?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, there's a lot of time we spent thinking about measuring standards and staying aligned to these certain goals and skill sets that came down from on high, and so that's like this kind of a pre-made course towards higher education, towards college. That's like what do kids need to know? What do kids need to know each year going forward? And what public school has done is it's kind of aggregated all that into an average. What does your average student need to know? And so working in low-income communities especially, where resources tend to be tighter, where getting talented folks into the building and to stay there can often be more difficult, it can be really hard to innovate because the pressure to perform that year in a predictable way is so high. Right? And so like to take a risk on some new platform that you're not exactly sure is going to work can be a lot more difficult. And that's where these microschools tend to come in, where they can say, all right, you know what, let's give this a shot. And we're so flexible and we're small enough that we can pivot quickly and try something else next year too.
It's almost like a sandbox, like it's like a small place to run an experiment, and then you get to see what fails, what succeeds, and then hopefully some of the things that succeed can make their way into something that's a bit more scalable or broad. Is that also part of the broader idea, maybe not for each of these individual schools, but as an industry, is that generally like what they're aiming towards?
I think that's what we identified as the opportunity that we can learn from them. I use the sandbox analogy, but I keep thinking of them as petri dishes. And the rest of these traditional school models are so rigid, like Jayson explained, but what can we learn from this petri dish that is rethinking time? And what can we learn from this petri dish that is rethinking the role of a teacher? And what can we learn from this petri dish that is getting their kids out of the school building and into the community? Like there must be something to be taken, a lesson to be learned and applied to a broader context. Now I think the biggest piece of work for us to do is to understand how to translate what is being done in small context to a broader context. And I think that question of access and the question of scalability is a huge one. But first step for this project is like, let's learn what's happening and uplift it to a broader audience.
Yeah, allow people kind of that option to like see what's out there and see what fits into their community. What we have found pretty clearly is like, we don't think that there's a model that is the future of school, a singular model. No one's found it, no one's figured it out. But there are aspects of it, and there are models that are perfect for where they are and perfect for that community. And what we've been looking at are what are the aspects of those that are universal as opposed to uniform. What are the things, when we talk about scale, what can scale through different contexts? Not necessarily the same idea in the same way, but what are those pieces that, what are the pieces to the puzzle that I can put together for my school and my community that's going to work for us?
And so based off of that, I think this is a really good jumping off point to explore what was in these different petri dishes. So you guys have been to 7 different schools. I'd love to hear a bit about what were some of the common threads between them that you think made them effective, and then some of the different approaches that are maybe tailored to their local environments. I know that you guys went to Alpha School, that was in New York, their New York location. Then there was one in rural North Carolina. There was like a lot of different places you traveled to. Whoever wants to take that first, but yeah, I'd love to like get a sense of what these different schools were like.
I want you to take it away, but why don't you explain just like broadly what a microschool is?
Yeah, so Probably the biggest thread is that they were microschools, which in a sense just means that they have a very small student population compared to many schools. I would say most of the school models, with the exception of maybe one, had less than 100 students. And so that relationship between the adults in the room and the students is very different when you have much better like ratios of staffing. But beyond that, not much. As a result of being a microschool, you're not subject to the same seat time requirements or standardized testing requirements that most schools are. So the direction that you can go with that experimentation is really, really wide. I think in education, so many people have talked about the goal is to be a self-directed learner, is like some of these phrases you hear, and so many people talk about phrases like project-based learning, where instead of working on just like an assignment on a paper, like you're doing something that's real and tangible. And while it might feel like these would look very similar place to place, what that actually meant in terms of how they designed the school and what the experience was like for students, to me at least, couldn't have been more different. Mm-hmm. And I think that was one of the earliest surprises that struck me going around these schools.
I think perhaps a thread that I did see, and I think we agreed on this, was what I had alluded to, that all of these schools are reevaluating the use of time. Like, time is mankind's most valuable resource, and I can say from a teaching background, time is of the essence when we are in the school building, and it is for sure the most valuable resource in a schoolhouse. And so you mentioned Alpha, who has this perceived to be radical reimagination of time, where all their learning takes 2 hours, and then the rest of the day is 6 hours of life skills workshops. Like, on paper, that is a radical use of time, but is it any more radical than traditional schooling, which says 6 45-minute blocks in a day is the best use of our time? I think there's a tension that exists there, that because it's different, it's scary.
Right.
And when we reevaluate the efficiencies of our traditional school models, I think there's a lot that comes to the surface as ripe for change, and time's one of them.
And what does that actually look like after the 2 hours of learning are done? Because my understanding is that it's not 2 hours is done and then, whoever wants to do, like, people do different things. Is there still some structure around after the classroom time?
Lots of structures. Structure in that they are thinking about life skills. So they try to teach kids public speaking, grit, resilience,
Financial literacy.
There's 5 that they really hang their hat on. And so from the Alpha higher ups, they schedule and plan life skills workshops. So the one when we went to the New York location, they own an entire floor of an office building where the school is, and the floor above it, which they turn into a carpentry workshop. And so the life skills workshop for that session, 6-week session, was teaching kids how to build a desk.
Right.
And through that, they're pulling on threads of resilience. Through that, they're pulling on threads of presenting what it is you built, public speaking. So, short answer to your question is yes, it's very structured. I think parents would be very dissatisfied if there's no structure after the 2 hours.
Right.
And it's an exciting model, right? It's challenging a lot of what we have become comfortable with as traditional education.
And so within that, it is challenging a lot of it. And I think the life skills thing is something that some of the other schools are doing something similar. Like Red Bridge is focusing a lot on agency. You have the Village School, which is a lot more almost introspective and about knowing yourself. So they're taking different aspects of, like, what does it mean to be a good human, as opposed to maybe just like, what does it mean to be a very effective contributor to the society, to the economy, which to me brings out the question of, like, what is the purpose of schooling as a whole, which we I really want us to get into, but on Alpha School itself, I'm curious to ask. I know Alt School was like almost like a predecessor before Alpha School. And one of the challenges that Alt School had was it was very, it was a big project, and a lot of like the tech founders were bringing their own children into it. But as far as like the scalability of it, I thought it was interesting case study because it was like heavily VC funded and not as easy to replicate across the country. But Alpha School has around 20 locations or so right now.
And counting, yep.
Mm-hmm. What's has there been any like lessons learned from Alt School that's been brought into Alpha School from like the business end of actually replicating it?
I think you should take that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to scaling schools, it's a hard thing to do, and a lot of different models have tried, a lot of different models have failed, and I think it comes down to like what is the business model of a school, and if it's relying on tuition, that's one model. Obviously, you have public schools which are relying on government funding, but I think at the end of the day, what's been really interesting about Alpha School is that their value network, like their financial support, is very much coming from, very similar to the Alt School, a lot of tech founders who are really, really interested in the space and really want to help fund these new models.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your question on the purpose of school is a really important one, because that was one of the few questions we actually asked every single school. And each one of them, with things like AI kind of posing an existential question, are starting by asking that question of what is the purpose of school?
Mm-hmm.
And scaling is generally coming from the standpoint of feeling that you found the solution or not. And Alpha is, I think, in a unique position where a lot of people are demanding the model across the city. We recently were at an event in Boston where families here in the area are trying to bring the Alpha model to the area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's definitely helped their expansion. But it's really early on, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's still in the early years, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But at least in the last few years, it's been a rapid explosion.
Yeah. I haven't looked a lot into like the process of making a small, almost petri dish experiment like catch fire and go across the country or just scale. But I think a lot of things in the beginning, they're a bit more expensive, whether it's like a new drug or a new technology, and then over time it gets more affordable and more accessible to a wider range of people. But I think if it's been able to at least scale to multiple locations, even if it's not yet like something that an entire city or like districts can bring on, I think that's a really good sign.
Yeah, and
as
I
a
think
starting point.
especially with Alpha, because they're developing their own software as well, which they're calling the time back software, that can hopefully scale even if the model of the actual Alpha School itself only has a finite number of locations.
Mm-hmm.
They've been really open with announcing that their goal is to reach 1 billion students. So it'll be interesting to see if the software itself is something that scales beyond the Alpha model and if they start licensing
Mm-hmm.
it out.
I know I want to go into the purpose of education thing in a second, so that's still on the table. But while we're on Alpha School and just generally on like the AI question, I know you've done some research around choice architecture and how social media companies or YouTube or these different platforms can use algorithms as a way to influence users, and obviously in this case too, if there's a software, children are going to be spending a lot of time interacting with a screen. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but what's been your assessment of like the benefits, the pros and cons of that? Education really being delivered through a screen.
Yeah, that's a great question. Surprised you actually read that research. Not a lot of people have read that. I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I think the simplest way I can put it is a phrase that one of my professors here puts it, is personalized learning the goal? And I think it's a question we all really have to ask. Our social experiences, as they're mediated by technology, are very much personalized. And that's why we each have an entirely different feed. Our discovery is different. Our social feed is different. And a lot of people have reported that they think that's had the negative consequence of leading to the polarization of society, because we don't realize exactly that each of us are seeing something different. And personalized learning itself, the promise of it is what brought me to this program, frankly. Because we do know at the same time that personalized learning leads to tremendous results on students' ability to master new content. Because at the end of the day, it has the ability to meet students where they are. So although a teacher is teaching this room full of 30 students, it's really hard for the teacher to be able to like have that one-on-one time with each student.
Right.
And a lot of the research that's constantly referenced is it's called the 2 sigma problem. But really what it's about is that like if teachers have time to be one-on-one with a student and really engage in this tutoring, that's the fastest way any student excels. And so this idea of AI being a tutor is really promising.
Right.
For the ability to learn content. But then it also comes at that trade-off of like, is personalized learning really the goal? And I think it's this difficult question that people have to really think about. And I personally have the belief that learning from a human is going to be, in the future, if AI is more and more integrated into schools, that's going to be the thing that's hopefully not, but might be reserved for the elite who have the resources. And that AI learning might be widely accessible and might improve the floor of education that's delivered now, but might instead become something that's maybe not the hallmark of education.
Yeah, right. Which in my mind has like, it opens up a lot of positive possibilities. Like if you can have anyone in the world have access to the best physics education or understand algebra or calculus or these like really core fundamental skills that just, education is just at the very root of just like a society's development, so you can have that in as many places as possible, ideally through, I don't know, like screens that or laptops that don't need connectivity to the internet. Like you can just have the whole thing on a laptop. But at the same time, there is that aspect of like the human development, the emotional intelligence. I haven't done I don't have stats on this, but I do know that, critical thinking and emotional intelligence, these are things that the more you spend time away from other people or you're not socializing, they can atrophy. And so I'm curious if within the research you guys have done, how that's being thought of. I mean, it seems like the microschools, they're all having some aspect of like this human-to-human interaction. But the question is if that will like translate to the new, broader education system that might evolve.
I just finished Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. If you haven't read it, you should give it a read. And he is kind of the leading scholar on social media harms for teens and young adults. And I think my short answer to that question is if you are a parent who's concerned about screen time in your child's development, we have huge opportunities in the school building to improve learning. So I would say regulate at home. Like, let's be more conscientious of what our children are digesting in an unprotected setting, which is what's happening at home, and it is leading to outrageous incidents and rates of self-harm and suicide attempts and bullying and body image problems, especially for young girls. I hear the buzz of I don't want my child's education to be on a screen, and at the same time I hear from families that screen time at home is a problem, but I don't know what to do. And so I think more and more we will start to see regulation on social media. Spain just followed in Australia's footsteps of passing a ban of social media under the age of 16. I think this will come more into fashion. But to Jason's point, like to raise the floor of what learning is for students is an opportunity that we cannot shrug at because we have fears of what social media has done to our children. Let's regulate social media and get that square once and for all. And then let's roll out this vision of personalized learning in a way that really does raise that floor.
Mm-hmm. Anything you would add to that?
Thinking about the floor, we're living in a world where perhaps we can redefine what that floor is, or, even if we don't redefine it, right, I think we all agree, like, there's a certain level of math and there's a certain level of reading that is necessary to continue to learn exponentially.
Right.
And then beyond that is where we all tend to disagree. What comes after you know how to read at this level? What comes after you know how to do math at this certain level? Mm-hmm. And, like, I couldn't tell you anything past algebra, and, like, that is fine for me. And for other people, that's not going to be okay for their line of work. And
right.
So I just think about, like, with that question, bringing it back to, like, what does that extra time look like? And, like, what does that mean about the shifting role of the teacher at school?
Yeah.
What if for everybody, it didn't mean algebra 2 for everybody? Mm-hmm. What does that now look like? What if you wanted to go down that path, there was a means to do it?
Yeah.
But we weren't shoving everyone through that same door.
Yeah. And I think an interesting experience that I got from visiting these schools was that almost all of the teachers that we met at these schools, some of the schools refer to them as guides or leads and have different titles for them, but the adults in the room, a lot of them talked about how much more meaningful their work has been since being in these environments. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, they're so subject to teaching content that they don't get to focus on the things that are really, really rewarding, which is having a relationship with a student and helping them and seeing them grow. Yeah. But I think this is one of the things that AI does really do, which is, like, by helping deliver some of the content, it allows them to, as Will mentioned, like, put their time into other parts of their work. And I think that's also one of the really promising parts that also shouldn't be overlooked. Yeah. Because right now, teaching, the people that spend the most time with our young learners in society is a profession that is not incentivized enough. And what we can do to reward the people that are doing this work and to incentivize people to go into these careers is, I think, one of the bigger questions that society has kind of been overlooking for a while.
What we can do to incentivize more teachers to be in these careers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, they carry one of the most important roles in society, but just from a compensation perspective, that's not something that's, as well compensated as it could be. It's kind of like the backbone of society that we just kind of take for granted. So I would love to see a combination of this, mindful skill-based, screen-based learning for the content, and then some of these, like, human skill building, resilience building approaches where humans actually get involved. Because I do really worry about a future of people who are not able to relate with each other and aren't as emotionally intelligent, or just, like, have a stake in other people. I was having this conversation in a class the other day where we were talking about, if more and more of your needs can be met through technology, what does that mean for our society? And one person basically in class said, well, if all of your needs can be met with technology, then if you don't need other people, like, I guess that's totally fine then. But my view on it is, if we completely decouple people from each other that are completely then independent islands that don't need each other, then that kind of takes away the incentive to have a civilization. Because civilization was based around, we can do more with each other than we can do it alone. Mm. And so that's where this, like, human to human socialization I'm really interested in. But that said, I'm also curious, I want to pick up on something you said about personalization. I think we've all talked a lot about it. I think there's a tension between personalized learning and the benefits that it has for every individual student, and what I think is a need for standardized assessment, but maybe that's just the assumption that I have. But when I was doing some research for this, I found that there was, like, some of the signs that education system right now isn't working as well was because, like, the average score level on X math test has been dropping over the past, 10 years. Or the absenteeism has had this. How do you guys think about that tension of, you know, needing to have some form of a standardization versus personalization?
I mean,
Yeah.
we could talk for hours about that.
And I'd love to hear from you, especially because, you know, given that you've been in the education space for so long. I mean, obviously everyone here, but I want to start with you first.
Yeah. Can I swear?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I've heard that, like, someone sent me YouTube video of someone on Capitol Hill talking about how scores are dropping, and this is the first generation that is performing lower on standardized tests than any generation previous. And, like, I don't know if I'm going to stand behind this 5 minutes from now, let alone 5 years from now, but, like, I really didn't give a shit. I think I'm always skeptical when we've standardized a system and a system of assessment, and that getting into college in the Northeast United States versus the South versus the middle of Idaho all feels kind of the same and runs by really similar criteria. I just question whose tests were taken and what do they want us to show them. Because when I think about the experience of color, the experiences of people of color in the United States around standardized testing, they've been at a disadvantage from the jump around, like, who is creating those tests, what they were designed to show, what knowledge is, what skills are. And, like, now we're in this environment where learning and how you learn and what you learn is rapidly evolving. How could we possibly think that the way in which we assess students is going to keep up if we've been doing it the same way for all these years? And so I think more so than concern around how we're doing on these tests that feel out of date, that feel like they don't say anything about, you know, they tell us stuff. I think assessments have some sort of place. I'm not willing to name what that is right here, right now. I don't think I could coherently say it, but I think, I like really think about, like, what it means to move forward out of those systems. What is it actually that we want these tests to tell us? Is it what those tests are telling us? Like, we've just decided that we agree on, like, what knowledge is. And, like, I haven't had a conversation with any individual person when we talk about personalization. Like, we all have different concepts of what it is, what's important to know, when you should know it in your life, and what you should use it for. And yet, in 8th grade, I should know this.
Right, I hear you.
I think,
Yeah.
I think jumping off Ruben's question, I've really had a lot of thoughts on this, and for me, this experience has shown me that I believe the purpose of school to be to love learning, and within that is both knowing how to learn and enjoying that process. And part of loving to learn, which is something that sticks with you for your entire life, is being able to ask yourself the question of what's worth learning, like Ruben had just said. And one of the things that a standardized test does is that it assumes that somebody else's answer to the question of what's worth learning should be everyone's. And I got really interested in, like, why standardized testing even appeared, and so I really ended up diving back into history. And standardized testing was actually first created as an evaluation of a school. When schools started to proliferate around the U.S. In the mid-20th century, because so many different school models were popping up, they wanted a way to understand if a school was doing a good job. And so they created these standardized exams, not as a measure of students, but as a measure of the school. And eventually, it became a measure of students. And I think that's what happens whenever you try to scale a model up. The same thing happens in restaurants. When you have a chain, every franchise is going to have its own score. It happens across every industry. And the result is that we end up making students responsible for something that wasn't even their grade in the first place. And this was something I was probably going to get to later, but I think what AI is doing more generally to the question of, like, what is the purpose of school is something that we've also seen in different fields as well. Most of history, most of learning, as measured by standardized tests, was evaluating students' ability to learn as much information as they could. It's led to a lot of memorization, it's led to all these things that we've all experienced. And the same thing actually happened in art. For most of art history, good art was being able to depict reality very accurately. If you look at all of Renaissance art, it's just getting art really, really detailed. But then when the photography, like when the invention of the camera came about and photography made capturing reality better, more democratic, and cheaper, it posed the question, what is the role of art? And as a result, we've had all of these later decades of art where you have things like Impressionism, things like abstract art, where it's now the artist's ability to give their impression and expression into the creation of their works. And I think what AI is doing to education is actually forcing us to answer that question. A student's ability to memorize and to learn lots of content is no longer important. Beyond certain things that we like, learning how to, like literacy and numeracy, that's no longer the thing that's going to be valued. And I think that's what's been the most interesting thing about this micro school, is it's making people ask, what is the point of school? And I would really be curious if society can deeply answer that question before they jump into using old tricks on new models.
Yeah, I want to like respond to what both of you said, but I also want to bring you in before.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah.
No, I think maybe this is devil's advocate, but in order to like pull levers of policy, there are policymakers that need to see a body of proof that something is working. And I think that is a challenge that education has to, or this emerging movement has to figure out. Like, how are we going to communicate that this is working in a way that is digestible to the people with power? So it's something to chew on and figure out. But I would just echo what Ruben and Jaysan said, in that if I, as a 6th grade math teacher, can no longer teach a class of, I had 126 graders in my class. I had 4 sections of 30, and my co-teacher went on maternity leave for 3 months, and so it was me against the world for 3 months. And there's no world in which I could have done that job better than personalized AI instruction will be able to do that. I think that takes care of the core content. Standardized testing, I just have a dreadful feeling that it will persist. But it comes back to this question of time. Once the kids learn the content, what else can we do with school? And how can we teach kids how to learn to love school?
Yeah, and I think, I forget if this was like a note or something you've said before, but I remember something along the lines of like, not everything that is worth measuring can be measured.
I stole our fourth teammates. He has a professor named June Laley in the ed school, and the quote is, "Not everything that's worth counting is easy to count, and then what counts is not always easy to count." Something like that.
What always counts cannot be counted, and what's always counted cannot count. Jesus Christ!
Yeah.
We need help.
I think
we brought in the fourth number.
I think it's what counts cannot always be counted.
Right, yeah, which means like a lot of these really important things that the Village School is doing with knowing yourself, or like the Redbridge School is doing with agency, might not be as easily put into a standardized answer. I would love to have some sort of like a resiliency score that we can measure. I would love that, because then if we can see it, if it's a true measure instead of like a faulty proxy, to have general resiliency or emotional intelligence go up, but it's not as easy.
Well, if I could jump in as the policy guy in it, because I want to touch on something that Will said, and you'll see now why we make such a good group with like our differing perspectives. But like coming to Huxley, what I realized was a lot of the view of like how education is going to change is through the policy sector, and that like proof of concept through these measurable means that show like this works and therefore policy should go this way, and you can support it because this is going to help you get elected and re-elected and moved on to your next thing, right? That's kind of how policy seems to work. And this world tour, this national tour of schools has really flipped that on its head for me. And I think just as powerful is convincing parents and families that this is something that is important for them, that is important to them, and important for their kids to grow. And so I think there's this other angle too of like, perhaps with these schools, even if you may not count it in the traditional sense of testing or whatever, not what Redbridge is doing, what Village School is doing, if enough families see this, if enough kids see this and respond to it, the policy is going to come along, I think. I think it's more of a grassroots movement than a grass tops movement in changing education.
And the acknowledgement that some of these non-measurable things also really matter, I think just intrinsically really important. I suppose as a way to bring in my devil's advocate into this, but also play like a yes and game to it is, so not everything that can be measured, not everything that's measurable or can be, that matters is measurable. That's one aspect of it. For parents, I can imagine if I am, my daughter or my son is growing up and they're going to go to an education system, I'm going to have the financial worry of like, I want to make sure they're going to be able to, have a career that they're fulfilled by and that they're going to be able to pay the bills. And I think just a fact about what schools do, like what higher education does, a lot of times it's a sorting mechanism. Like in my classroom that is at the Harvard Kennedy School, I'm not necessarily learning anything that is just, astronomically different from like some other school like 3 blocks down the road. It's not a ding at MIT, but it's like the marketplace looks at it and it's like, okay, the sorting mechanism of Harvard has decided that these students are going to be better contributors to society than like I don't know, another school, let's say my undergrad school, and so if that's still going to be a fact of just the way the economy works, I wonder if there's like a measurable and unmeasurable combination that needs to happen. I don't know how you guys have thought about that aspect of it.
We've been actually thinking about this a lot this week because what we're referring to is the signaling aspect of school, which you particularly see with colleges and like universities. And there's people who have wrestled forever around like, okay, is the point of school the things that or is the value of school the things that you're learning there, or is it what you can communicate to the rest of society? And there's a professor here, Dr. Peter Blair, who has a really interesting approach on it, which is if hiring itself is skills-based, where skills is the common denominator of how different roles are, or people are found for different roles, that would still incentivize people to go to top universities, because top universities are making the argument that they're preparing their student body with skills that can't be acquired or elsewhere. And I think that's also part of the future as well. Is like there's no denying that like for as long as society exists, there's going to be such a thing as prestigious institutions, and that's because we are social beings. And whether that's right or wrong, I think it is something that's going to continue to exist. But I think that when it comes to how you were evaluated, we have to find something that is, as you mentioned, a little bit more universal. And to me, I think that's skills. I could be wrong, but that's currently where I sit with it.
Yeah, I'm in that class too, and I feel more and more disenchanted with higher ed every day. And I think there's I just think that I am a K through 12 flag bearer, and I believe so wholeheartedly in the importance of K through 12. And if we are sifting promising students out of a process that is a middleman to get into the labor market, we're going to miss talent, and we are going to sell the dream of this historically really valuable education that has ensured you a place in the job market. Like, you're not ensured a place in the job market anymore if you have this degree. And so there has to be a reckoning, I agree, with how we are selecting candidates for a job. I think it underscores the importance of K through 12 even more, that we are establishing in our school systems opportunities for all learners, furthest away from opportunity most importantly, to have real life experiences with opportunities that excite them and engage them, and I just don't know what happens to higher ed. I have major concerns for higher ed.
I think, sorry.
No, I think I just think about how, like, yes, higher ed sorting, but everyone's been pre-sorted, essentially in this country based on where you live and where you grew up and the economic status of that neighborhood. It's the greatest indicator of academic success that we have, is how much money your family makes. And so until, I think higher ed has a lot harder job, and is a lot more equitable in its sorting when we sort out what happens ahead of time, when we sort out what happens in K-12 education first.
I see, yeah. So it sounds like there is, going back to what you originally said, there's like this is an opportunity to rethink what actually is the right things to measure, because what's been the case for a variety of reasons might not have been even applicable for the old world, but now it's also like a world where, you know, the digital camera is coming in, and so you might not need to paint reality as much, based on the fact that AI is available and you can have, like, you know, so much access to not just information but processing of that information. So like we got to figure out what is the right thing to measure, and then what the role of higher education is going to look like, which I've thought a lot about this too. If a lot of these recent grads that are coming out of, you know, universities, they're having a hard time finding roles because, you know, the companies are like, well, yeah, we don't need the entry level people as much anymore in some sectors, in like computer science and like, you know, customer service and all that.
The job you went to school for 4 years ago doesn't exist now 4 years later.
Man, like a huge thing that comes out of these prestigious institutions is like people going into investment banking or going into like consulting or like these, you know, knowledge worker jobs. And I just think about when I was doing consulting 3 years ago as a business analyst, the first, you know, tier, most of my like day could just be done in 10 minutes with AI, like building slide decks and doing research and all that. And then the company, you know, it may not need as many of those people.
Not teaching. Everybody should go teach. It's an important job, and there will always be a need for humans. Go teach.
And I think higher education is also not a monolith. You have everything from community colleges to state colleges to private institutions. And I think a little bit of what we're seeing with these microschools in the K-12 space is you're seeing a little bit of free market competition. And it's putting pressure, and hopefully the downstream effect is that it's not that it'll necessarily put pressure on public universities, but it'll also at the same time give them the ability to make the changes that I think a lot of people in public education have wanted to make. And I think in the higher education space, new innovations are going to put a lot of pressure on higher education institutions to crystallize their value proposition. I think if we look at something like Harvard, at least in the graduate schools, which I'm more familiar with, because I wasn't here for undergrad, the graduate schools actually have very, very crisp value propositions, and they live up to them. Coming from California, the community college system there has a really crisp value proposition, and I would love to see more higher education institutions kind of live up to the promises they say they're making to students.
Well, we're at 4, so I know I don't want to keep you for too long, but I wanted to see if on the topic of like the purpose of education itself, there's anything more that any of you wanted to add, and if there's any other things that we wanted to cover before.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, my answer is similar to what Jaysan mentioned earlier. Like, the purpose of school is to make you fall in love with it. And I think, you know, I was at my friend's wedding last summer, and he was talking about his wife, and he said, you know, you make my world bigger. And that's, like, I think the greatest feeling of love that I have is that my world with you expands. And I think, like, you should go to school expecting and hoping and experiencing that your world's growing. You're experiencing different perspectives. You're learning about new topics. Some of those things you want to know about. Some of those things you're just there to take in sometimes, which is okay. But I think, like, it should open you up to a bigger world. And then you should love being in that world.
I love that. I love that because I think having that love is going to be something that drives us even more in the AI world, because if you don't have the desire innate, you don't have to, retain knowledge. So unless it's driven by true intrinsic motivation, you can just chat GPT your way into a lot of different things. I want to close this conversation. I know there's a lot of rabbit holes we can go down, but I want to close it by just going back to the report that you guys are bringing out soon. Like, what is that going to be sharing? Is it a summary of the work you've done? Yeah, and then we can end with that.
Yeah, so we're in the editing process, but we're writing about each of the 7 schools that we saw, really trying to make sure that each voice, each background comes through the writing, using the platform that we have to bring to a larger audience the fact that these schools are here and worth taking very seriously. And so we'll publish in the next 2 weeks digitally, and then we're going to get print and try to share it with all the graduate schools here, all the graduate schools of education around the country. And I think something that was very apparent to us in the fall when we started this project is that nobody's talking about this, even at Harvard. And if people at Harvard aren't talking about this, that there's probably a good chance that a lot of other people aren't talking about this who should. So stay tuned. Follow us on LinkedIn.
Amazing.
I run the account.
tomorrowschools.
tomorrowschools on LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I might add one thing,
Please.
We're also really hoping to share the stories of how these schools were made and the people who made them, because humans are making these, and there's no reason why more of these can't be built around the country.
Yeah. Amen to that. Any last words from you?
No, I think that's it. I think there's lessons to be learned around like what works in these communities, what's worked for these founders, and like what can work for you.